Yesterday's ceremony on the historic signing of the Comprehensive Agreement on the Bangsamoro is anticipated to bring harmony between the Philippine government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. This agreement is also expected to convince remaining armed groups such as the NPA to talk peace. But some believe that the signing came at a time when the sincerity of the administration to honor past agreements with these organizations is in question. The Communist Party of the Philippines and its armed wing, the New People's Army or the CPP-NPA, is the longest-running insurgency group in the world, formed in 1969. The NPA was even designated as a foreign terrorist organization by the U.S. State Department and as a terrorist group by the European Union Common Foreign and Security Policy. The government of the Philippines, however, has delisted the NPA as a terrorist organization in 2011. In its more than 4 decades of existence, peace negotiations have gone up and down and just recently reached an impasse after the alleged walkout of the National Democratic Front or NDF panel after a disagreement on the agenda. The prospects for talks with the communists got even dimmer after the recent arrest of the alleged CPP chairman Benito Tiamzon and his wife, CPP Secretary General Wilma Tiamzon. Both are said to be NDF consultants. The recent turn of events between the CPP, NPA, NDF, and the Philippine government cast more doubts on each other's sincerity to the peace process, prolonging the longest insurgency in the world and the attainment of peace far from reality. Welcome to Opposing Views, a hard, straightforward discussion of today's most pressing issues. The National Democratic Front of the Philippines, or NDF, has been engaging in peace negotiations with the Philippine government for the past 27 years. But issues of mistrust, insincerity, extrajudicial killings, unlawful arrests, and many more impede such process. It is certainly far from over. So we ask tonight, does the arrest of Benito and Wilma Tiamzon hamper the peace talks between the CPP, NPA, NDF, and the Philippine government? Good evening, I'm Rod Nepomuceno, and this is Opposing Views. All right, joining us tonight in our discussion is Ray Casambre, Executive Director of the Philippine Peace Center. Good evening, Ray.
Good evening.
Yes, could you give us maybe a 30-second summary of your position regarding the debate matter for tonight?
Well, the Philippine Peace Center definitely thinks that the arrest of the Tiamzons would hamper the negotiations for 2 reasons. One, it is a violation, another violation of the agreements entered into by the 2 parties. And second, which also constitutes a violation, but even from the point of view of Philippine law, the arrest and the continuing detention is illegal. So in other words, it is a human rights violation, which you do not have to be a member of the NDF or the party to see. If you look at the rights of the people, you can see, and if you look at the case, the incident, the facts, even by Philippine law, it is illegal. And this also affects the negotiations because one of the agreements, aside from the agreement on safety and immunity guarantees, is the agreement on human rights and international humanitarian law, meaning both parties are committed to respect human rights and international law, and that would include the question of whether arrests are legal or illegal. Right. As far as the violation of agreements is concerned on JASIG, it can also be shown. You don't have to be an NDF or CPP member. You merely read the joint agreement, look at the facts, and it can be seen that clearly Benito Tiamzon and Wilma Tiamzon are covered by the safety and immunity guarantees.
All right. All right, thank you very much, Ray. And to my left, on the opposing side, is Attorney Alex Padilla, Chairman of the Government Panel negotiating with the CPP, NPA, NDF. Good evening, Alex.
Yes.
Yes, good evening. Your 2 cents worth on this issue.
Well, I think the arrest of the spouses Tiamzon should not dampen or hamper any progress of the peace talks. I think this is one is completely separate from the other. If the other side was really sincere in actually coming to terms with Philippine government on the peace. Of course, I dispute what Ray is saying about the illegality of the arrest or even the applicability of the JASIG. But I think we can do that.
We can do that, yeah. I guess so the whole point of this debate, this discussion, is to clear out the air, I guess, and also to find out more of the details regarding this matter. There's obviously it's been the content. It's been on our headline, the content of news. It's been on the headlines of all major broadsheets. So let's start off with this question, and you touched on this already, Ray. Is the arrest legal? Of course, you already answered that it wasn't legal. And can you elaborate further why this arrest of the Tiamzons is not legal?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but again, you don't have to be a lawyer to understand. Anybody knows that once you're arrested, an arrest warrant is supposed to be shown to you. In the case of the Tiamzons and their 5 companions, well, from the reports of the lawyers and from the news, we know that no warrant has been shown to them for at least, I think, even up to the present. And again, even if you do not know this for a fact, you know for a fact from the information that an inquest was held, again, much past beyond the time that this is required by Philippine law. But the point is, in that inquest, they were charged for illegal possession of firearms. Now, what's wrong with this? I thought they were supposed to be charged with the murders in Samar and the murders in Leyte. But why is this not the charge being made now when they were in the inquest? So a lot of questions.
So on that basis, the arrest is illegal.
Arrest and continuing detention.
And continuing detention.
So
because one, there was no warrant of arrest.
Yes.
Right. And two, they were being charged for something else.
The charges were made long after the required time.
All right. Okay.
Yes.
So, Attorney Alex,
Yes.
the point Ray is making is that this is an illegal arrest. So obviously, the government is at fault.
Well, Ray is arguing like a lawyer, even if he said that he is not one. I, for one, am a lawyer, but I will not argue on the legal aspects of this case, simply because I think there's a time and place and a venue wherein these matters will be settled, if not with the DOJ, with the courts in place. So I think there will be a proper time that these issues will be litigated.
But in the meantime, they're obviously incarcerated, they're in jail.
Yes, they are, and I think the military has filed the necessary charges or the cases. I don't know if it was within the time given by law, but I suppose it was. If it wasn't, then I think that will also be litigated before the courts, whether the arrest was illegal or not. So I will leave that matter for the courts. I do not know enough about the circumstances of his arrest that I would say that it was an illegal arrest or not.
Because I think the question of the legality or illegality of that arrest also is hinged on the fact or the claim that they are NDF consultants, meaning part of the negotiating panel of the NDF. Can you shed some light on that?
Well, it is our position that now we're referring possibly to the JASIG, the Joint Agreement on Safety and Immunity Guarantees. Insofar as the Philippine government is concerned, they are not consultants, simply because, for one, Benito Tiamzon was never part of the peace process. Of course, he may be claimed to be a consultant, and I understand that he goes by the alias of Crispin Banaag. But I think, Ray, of course, we will probably dispute this as well. Sometime in July of 2011, based on the agreement of the JASIG, we had asked for a verification. And that was part of the agreement. The verification simply meant that for anyone using an alias, there was supposed to be deposited in a safety deposit box in the Netherlands photographs where we could match, once we asked for verification, we could have matched the photograph from the alias.
The alias, yeah.
And if they match, then they would be released. No?
And the whole point of that is verification, so that if that's one and the same person, you release them. And,
yes, because of course they're saying that we should not have verified because for the past so many years we have not asked for verification. But the point is, it's part of the agreement, and that was our right to ask for it. So when that happened, in front of the NDF, in front of the government, and Norway, etc., what we were surprised to find in the disc, in the box was a diskette instead of photographs. Of course, the NDF claimed that the diskette contained the photographs. Fine. Then they tried to open it, and they could not open the diskette. So when we could not verify, because the diskette was purely the property of the NDF, no one tampered with the safety deposit box. So when we could not verify, we told them that as far as the Philippine government is concerned, we deem the agreement on JASIG in relation to those using aliases as inoperative.
Meaning
it's not in effect. No?
Yeah, so meaning they cannot get a pass, or
that's right.
Their security can't be assured.
That's right. And however, there are some named that we recognize. Louis Halandoni, Fidel Agkawili, these are already named and in the list. Now, Wilma Austria was also part of that list. But she participated in the peace, I think, terms in 1994, 1995. That was 20 years ago. 20 years ago. And the premise of JASIG is that you're actually involved or participating in the peace talks. And we do not consider her participating because we all knew for a fact that she went underground and actually controlling the operation.
So Ray, can you clarify that according to Alex, they're not part of the peace talks, and therefore they're not part of the JASIG, and therefore they can be arrested?
I think it's very presumptuous of the government to be the ones to declare who in the NDF is participating in the peace negotiations or not. And then it is also unreasonable for the government to say that you have to be visibly present in the negotiations, or that you have to be visibly participating in the negotiations to be duly accredited,
to be part of the peace process.
Yes, to be, as the words he used, is part of the process. But it is only this administration and this panel which is demanding this condition or defining this this qualification,
this requirement.
Previous panels, because it is obvious that to be part of the negotiations, a lot of the NDF members are in the underground. Not all of them
They're
are.
in the field. They're in the field. They're
Yes.
not on the
and
table.
if you want to consult, how can you consult visibly with the NPA or with the other mass organizations?
But what is your comment on that diskette, though? The diskette, they couldn't open it. So, or what?
Most of the facts stated by Alex are accurate, but number one, there's one tiny thing. He says that the diskettes in the
Did not contain
safety
the pictures.
deposit box were not tampered with.
Yeah.
Well, that's true, but the decrypting diskettes were taken by the Dutch police from the NDF, and it was returned to them, but there were supposed to be 5 diskettes, but only 4 were returned.
Okay.
So we cannot say whether these diskettes were tampered with or not, the decrypting
So there's a question mark there.
But then again, that's already, let's say, water under the bridge.
Yeah.
The point is now, having encountered this problem, the NDF proposed that the list be reconstituted. The government refuses. Why? Well, they have, I don't know. The agreement.
Alex, why are they refusing, though?
The agreement stipulates that should there be any problem, the two sides should sit down and try to resolve it. Not only the agreement. President Ramos, soon after the signing of the JASIG, issued an executive order 276, forming an interagency committee with the purpose of coordinating with the NDF and expressly to be able to resolve problems should they arise. Now, that kind of mechanism existed for a long time. Well, maybe it didn't work too well, but it did on several occasions. But in June 2012, this panel, this current government panel, unilaterally dissolved it saying that we have other means now of working for the release of the detained, alleged or claimed JASIG protected persons.
Yeah, okay.
But again, this was a unilateral act.
Yeah, all right. Now, Alex, regarding that claim, that there was an offer again to reconstitute the list.
Yes, true. We have refused, no, the proposal to reconstruct, because we already know how that will end. And it would end with them putting in the names of those actually already arrested and jailed, and to be part of their consultants, and therefore to be demanded to be released. This has been the tenor of our negotiations for the past 25 years. Most of those were interrupted or were put at an impasse simply because the NDF kept on demanding the release of prisoners. Now let me cite, he mentioned about participating in the ground. It's not as if the government had not released any of their consultants, no? Whether for various reasons, there were several releases. Unfortunately, out of the 6 that were released, I think 3 went underground. Okay. And the other 3 participated openly. So obviously, there was a difference between those going underground and those openly participating.
Sorry to interrupt you, Alex. We need to take a short break. Meanwhile, join the discussions online. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/SolarOpposingViews. Follow us also on Twitter at @opposing_views. Use the hashtag #OpposingViews. Stay tuned. You're watching Opposing Views. Welcome back. You're still watching Opposing Views. We have with us Ray Casambre, Executive Director of the Philippine Peace Center, and Attorney Alex Padilla, Chairman of the government panel negotiating with the CPP, NPA, and DF. And our debate question for tonight is, does the arrest of Benito and Wilma Tiamzon hamper the peace talks between the CPP, NPA, NDF, and the Philippine government? Now, there's this acronym called JASIG. It means Joint Agreement on Safety and Immunity Guarantees. We've been mentioning that earlier for those who have just tuned in. And the main crux, I think, here is that whether the arrest of Benito and Wilma Tiamzon violated the JASIG, because supposedly this Joint Agreement on Safety and Immunity Guarantees allows for safety pass for people, members of the NDF. Now, do you think, I think the question also that we have to ask is, does the JASIG still exist? Because if it doesn't exist, then there's no pass for Benito and Wilma Tiamzon. Is that correct, Ray?
Well, that's correct, but
does the JASIG still exist?
The JASIG, if you look again at the agreement, it clearly says that to terminate, for it not to exist, either party will have to terminate it. And how? It has to issue a written notice, not just a notice, not just an announcement in the press or in the papers, a written notice to the other party to the effect that it's terminating the agreement. And it only becomes binding and effective 30 days after receipt by the other party. Well, as far as I know, the government, neither the government nor the NDF has issued any notice of termination, so it exists. However, this is the problem now, and that's what we want to ask the government. You said you don't want to reconstitute it because you know what's going to happen. What's your alternative? Because without an alternative, de facto you are terminating or you are declaring that it is no longer operative.
Well, we already said that. It's not operative with regards to those using aliases. That's one. No? Okay. For another, we also said that it is still operative with regards to those named persons who are actually participating in the peace process. And I already made mention some of those names.
Named and identified persons.
Yes. Now remember, JASIG was a document that was agreed upon 20 years ago. You don't have a continuing negotiation for 20 years or 2 decades, and we have not moved forward since 20 years ago because we are precisely burdened by arguments and legalities and technicalities like this when we don't even talk about and that's precisely why we are also against reconstructing the list, because then we will now be having debates on who should be included in the list or not, when what the people wants us to do is really to sit down and talk and how to lessen violence, how to stop the killings. That's what the people want us to do, not on who can negotiate for or to whom. No? So,
Now, do you think, though, that...
can I answer?
yes, go ahead, Ray.
Alex, the JASIG was signed a mere 4 years after the Hague Joint Declaration. Actually, 3 years, and then you have additional implementing rules. You're not talking about 20 years.
It's still 1995, Ray.
The reason it's... Oh, by the way, the negotiations started in 1992, so the 27 years and your... What did you say?
The negotiations started in 1986 when well, again, that's a difference of opinion. No?
This round of negotiations started in 1992 with the Hague Joint Declaration. You can't count 1986 because there was a different framework, different conditions.
Even with 1992, you're talking about what, 22 years?
Yes, but
There's
the
no
JASIG,
such thing as negotiations being done for 22 years.
well, it's not true that nothing has happened. You have Karil, and we were supposed to start discussing the social and economic reforms. The NDF is prepared with its proposal. The government was in 1998, but they've decided to replace it, and now we don't have
Ray, but
yet
you seem
a
to
new
forget. No? You
proposal.
seem to forget that in 2011, we had agreed that we will finish all the 3 remaining agreements in 18 months' time.
Yes.
We were preparing for that meeting, and then suddenly in July of 2011, what did the NDF do? Suddenly they stopped talks, saying that we had to release all, if not most, of the consultants.
Because that was part of your agreement.
But again, that part of the agreement also mentioned verification. That's why that's why we actually
you couldn't verify it. You couldn't verify it.
Look, at the risk that government had to take, no, when we went to the Netherlands for that verification process, it meant that if the photographs were there, if the aliases would match, we would release everyone. So it was a risk also that the government had to take, whether or not that was true. But it failed.
But don't you think, though, that just the mere fact of a diskette malfunctioning, don't you think that that's sort of like an easy way out? Oh, the diskette wasn't functioning, therefore
but that wasn't our doing. The point is, the diskette was kept, deposited by the NDF. Government had no hand in it.
Ray? Your thoughts?
The big problem is that this government and this panel has changed the rules. The additional implementing rules, which were agreed upon in 1996, state that the opening of the safety box is only the last resort for verification. Now, let me say, what about Wilma Tiamzon? She's not working on, she doesn't have an alias. It's her name. Right. But now you're giving a different reason why she cannot be released. You said because she went underground. But where in the agreement says that you cannot go underground?
If I were to interpret Ray's words, no, it would mean like this. Okay, I now fight a war. I now kill, etc., people or the soldiers. And then, when I'm arrested, I invoke JASIG. And when I invoke JASIG, I go underground again and do the killings again. And when arrested, I again invoke JASIG. It's ridiculous.
Okay.
But only those that should be participating in the peace process should be protected.
All right. So, in other words, of course, we have to determine whether she indeed committed those killings, right? Well, that's a matter of, I guess, a legal procedure.
And that she did not participate in the negotiations or in the peace process. By you are concluding that the Tiamzons had no role in building the consensus.
But your position is that they had a role.
That is their claim, and I think the government is not in a position to judge that.
Well, it's always easy to say that, no? Anyone can allege doing something without seeing it, no? But the point of the matter is in that 20 years, from 1995 up to 2014, ni Anino, ni Benito, or ni Wilma, we never saw them. Right. They were never part of any group that actually.
So, Ray, do you think the arrest is a setback to the CPP, NPA, NDF talks with the government? Do you think it's a major setback, or do you think it can go on? Because Attorney Alex mentioned earlier, it shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be if it were not a violation. It is not so much the loss of these leaders that sets it back, but the fact that government blatantly violates the agreements. And if no matter what kind of agreement that is, it's a contract or a labor management agreement, each side naturally demands or expects compliance from the other side. Otherwise, what's the use? How can you expect, for example, that the NDF will believe that the government is going to implement reforms, big reforms.
In other words, you question sincerity. If they can't, if here they're arresting someone among your ranks.
I wouldn't call it sincerity. It's just a plain question that if you cannot
follow this agreement.
Yes, if you cannot comply with your smaller agreements, what about the bigger ones?
But actually, we have been complying. The fact of the verification process was really part of the agreement. It wasn't separate. It wasn't an invention of government. Verification came with JASIG, and we invoked it. Of course, Ray says that the past governments have not invoked it, that was supposed to be a last option for the parties. But it was still an option. That was the whole point. It was still an option, and we invoked it. No? So we did comply with the agreement in that sense. What we are saying now is that what cannot happen is really that you keep on invoking many of these provisions in order to actually derail or to dislocate the peace process. Because look at where we are now. We are talking about the legality, the specificity of the arrest, etc. But have we discussed the peace process? No. We put it forward to Ray and the group, the panel, that we want to discuss a possible truce. We want to discuss a lessening of violence. We want to discuss certain steps and measures that would redound with concrete positive results to our people. So.
Now, Ray, do you think that the arrest, do you think it agitates this CPP, NPA, NDF to the point that it wouldn't want to be sitting down with the government? Do you think it's agitated enough for,
No, not to the point. Well, of course, you will hear some statements that, as I said, the big question is compliance. It's not just the arrest per se, it's not the loss, but the point that how can you talk with another party that continues to violate what you had agreed upon? Of course, the question is, the government will say, we're not violating. Now, even that is anticipated by the earlier negotiators. So they put in provisions precisely to resolve this. Sit down again and talk. Reconstitution, if you have other ideas how the participants can be protected, if you have other ideas, you cannot impose this unilaterally. You sit down and discuss what is the mutually acceptable, that's the term.
Alex, is the Constitution out of the question?
Yes, it's out of the question simply because we already know that the other side will simply put the names of Benito Tiamzon.
But are you prejudging them? You already know you're going to...
No, well, let's put it this way. No? I think even the NDF or the Communist Party has come out with a statement saying that they are top operatives of their organization. That's what the military also says, etc. No? Would I want to risk having them released, and then going underground again and prolonging the war, no? So I think it has parang inuntog natin ang ulo natin again, na tapos paulit-ulit that look, we have been in this game for the past 20 years.
So it's time to put your foot down.
Well, yes, it's time that maybe we should now talk whether are we now sincere in talk. Let's discuss about what we should be discussing.
All right, so I'll ask that question when we when we return. Now, in the meantime, we need to take a short break. More on the issue of peace deals between the CPP, NPA, NDF, and the Philippine government when we come back. Please stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching Opposing Views on the Solar News Channel. Our guests for tonight, Ray Casambre, Executive Director of the Philippine Peace Center, and Attorney Alex Padilla, Chairman of the Government Panel negotiating with the CPP, NPA, NDF. And our question for this evening, does the arrest of Benito and Wilma Tiamzon hamper the peace talks between the CPP, NPA, NDF, and the Philippine government? Now, let's go to the demands. I mean, as we were talking during the break, this insurgency has been going for quite a while, and it started in 1969. I think most of us were a lot younger then. And now, but let's go to the demands. The demands of the CPP, NPA, NDF that are on the table, and let's just talk about, I guess, the obstacles in eventually coming up with an agreement with the government and the CPP, NPA, the first demand is national industrialization. Maybe you should maybe elaborate on this and whether this should be a go or no go, or this demand has to be on the table.
Yes, of course, it has to be on the table, and we were surprised when the government panel labeled this demand as ideologically charged, along with land reform. Now, it's a very real problem. You don't have enough industries. Whatever industries you have are only packaging, reassembly, what economists would call very small value added. And it is not enough to produce the income, the national income, to be able to buy in the imports that you need, precisely again because you don't have the industries. I don't know, maybe if the government thinks that these are ideologically charged, then they can put another term to it, but it's the same problem. You cannot escape talking about this problem because you need industries. And you need land reform.
Our problem that we don't mind talking about the issue. We never denied talking about the issue. What we do mind is that we never got to talk about the issue, simply because the NDF has put forward that before we talk, we have to release certain people, and when you release, they go underground. So that's the problem. We want to discuss these issues, but the NDF does not seem to want to move ahead, to move forward.
So it seems the crux now is the release demand.
Okay.
Not so much the national industrialization. It's more
I'm glad Alex brought it up again because I wanted to reply to that point. You see, what he's saying now is that they don't want to risk giving security guarantees or releasing, even if they know that these are document holders. They don't want to risk releasing this and these people going back again to the underground or to go back to their work, which happens to be in the underground. That's looking very narrowly at one side of the picture. What about the risks that the NDF has been taking when they come out in the open?
Pero Ray,
Wait a minute.
From experience and record, what are the risks? Those out in the open negotiating have not been harmed.
Teroy Llamas is part of the negotiations. Before you came in, he was already a part of the Reciprocal Working Committee. He did not go back to the underground, but still he was assassinated. Jaime Soledad, one of those that was released after 2011. So he goes back. He did not go back to the underground. What happens? He was rearrested. They're taking risks, and it is even the bishops, even the religious leaders who had volunteered to be custodians, to be able to facilitate these releases, they could not understand why the government is demanding that those who are released will have to remain visibly above ground. And even the bigger irony here is that when one of those consultants agreed to remain above ground and agreed to participate in the categorically said, I'm going to participate in the negotiations and be visible. So he applied for this.
You're referring to the Tiamzons?
No. I'm referring to Fred Mapano in Mindanao. It was a long process. Bishop Letesma and Senator Gingona were going to be the custodians. So the corresponding, the required motion for recognizance, which is similar to bail, was filed. But what happens? The government prosecutor objects to it, and the judge turns down that motion.
I'm surprised that Ray brings up that example, no? Because precisely we had proposed, and I think it was Ray was there when we first came
up. Yes, we were both in that.
We had proposed the recognizance, etc. And as far as I know, it was the NDF and the detainees who refused to utilize the recognizance.
They refused the additional conditions that you were requiring. And which even the bishops who were used to this thing.
And what were those additional requirements?
That they should remain
visibly above ground and that they visibly participating. But the work of a consultant is not necessarily visible.
Our
For
position
reasons of
is short
safety.
and clear here. No? If we talk about the peace negotiations, let's talk about it and come to terms as soon as possible. And when that happens, everybody will be released. But we cannot do it for the past 20 years where you ask for the release, and even if they're released, you say that they are consulting, but actually the war has been stretching out. No?
And why is that? Because there's so much at stake?
I think it would be foolhardy for us to think that what these people, once released, and they are supposedly top commanders of the NPA or top leaders of the underground movement, that they would work for peace. I think that's really hard to believe, no? But if we really work for the provisions of the peace accord, whatever, just like in all other experiences of peace agreements all over the world, the releases happens after the fact. After the product or after the peace pact has been signed, not before.
Tony Alex, what if they, the CPP, NPA, NDF, demand the release of the Tiamzons as a precondition to sitting down?
Then we will not talk. Then we will not. It's as simple as that. It's a question of sincerity on the part of both sides, I'd like to think. I think on the part of government, we have shown that what we did with the MILF, that we will go to a large extent, to a far extent, on how to get peace. No? But remember, even the MILF, at least they agreed to a truce, even while they were holding the arms. No? And the continued operations were done by the military. If they violated the law, they were arrested, etc. Why couldn't this be agreed upon with the NDF?
Isn't that possible, Ray? Or do you think that this should be resolved first, the issue on Benito and Wilma Tiamzon?
It is possible. And in fact, the reason that the NDF proposed in January 2011 what is now being called the special track, the proposal for an alliance and truce, was to have, it was superior to the proposal for a ceasefire or the demand for a ceasefire. This is not just a ceasefire, it's a truce. And it is accompanied by an alliance cooperating on certain important, it's too small to call it a project, programs. Programs in industrialization, in land reform. But unfortunately, again, that proposal was shut down. Government's version is that it was the NDF that shut it down, but NDF thinks it was the government which really refused to discuss the concrete proposals, calling them unreasonable demands.
Well, first
there's a difference between a demand and a proposal.
Confirm what Ray said. No, it's true about that special track. We were very attracted to that special track. In fact, it came from the NDF. That initiative came from the NDF, and we were talking about it, discussing it, and in December of 2011 or 2012, I think, no, 2012, we had almost come to terms. We had almost agreed and signed in the Hague. And what did it call for? It called for a truce or a ceasefire, the lessening of the hostilities. It called for a creation of a certain council or committee involving both sides where we can discuss the problems. And if we had signed, I mean, we should have signed as early as December, but we decided to meet 2 months after. After 2 months, we did not discuss about what we talked about in December. What they were planning for us to discuss was they brought in 3 new documents, completely new documents that we were unaware of, and they wanted to discuss these 3 new documents and going back to the old study or process of going through all the agreements, the releases, etc., and demanding that we stop the Bayanihan program of the AFP, we stop the conditional cash transfer of the DSWD. So
there were a lot of other demands.
In other words, if from our end, from our viewpoint, they were not interested. They simply wanted to discard the discussion.
Now, given yes, Ray.
I think that version is a complete distortion. Or, well, let's just say it's completely different from the version of the NDF. Because the version of the NDF, I don't know how you can say now that you were ready to sign when the version was, from the reports of the NDF, that you can see it on the website, the government had their own draft. Maybe that's what you meant, that if the NDF agreed to the government's draft, then they will sign. But if the NDF gives their own draft, the government panel actually refused to discuss it.
So both parties offered something,
well,
offered documents.
Again, Ray was not there in that meeting.
Yes, but
I was.
that's why I'm quoting them.
I was in that meeting. What we were discussing in the special track was the creation of a national committee comprised of both representatives, a calling for a truce or hostilities to stop, and basically to agree that we could already sign or agree to something like this and come up to terms and say that we will be discussing all the other problems within that committee, etc. In fact, it came from the other side also that that was supposed to be a committee that was recommendatory in nature. So we were very, very positive. No, because it was a complete departure from the tedious, lengthy discussions that we had previously.
You were covering so many
but suddenly, about the versions, we came up with our own version, of course, but we did not depart too far away from that original version. But when they came up with 3 new documents, they were demanding so many things.
Now, I understand we're sometimes this whole insurgency, which has been going on for a while, it's been overtaken by a lot of circumstances.
Yes.
And people have come and gone. Some people who are involved in it are no longer with us, and there are new personalities involved. But overall, Alex, and I'll ask you, Ray, do you believe in the sincerity of the CPP, NPA, NDF in trying to resolve? At least it starts there. No? The question of sincerity. Do you think they are sincere in wanting, peace with the government?
To be perfectly candid, let me just say that I don't think the NDF is prepared to talk peace. Maybe I'll put it that way now, because if they were, I think we could conclude this agreement in a matter of a year or 2 years at most.
Ray, what are your thoughts on that?
The kind of peace that the government is saying they're ready to have is an agreement which would you would have an end of hostilities first before you talk about the reforms later.
Yes.
It reminds us of the Tripoli Agreement of 1976 between the government and the MNLF. If you look at it, it's a short few pages where that's exactly what it says. Let's have an end of hostilities, then you'll have autonomy. The details of this autonomy we talk about later. The details of the question of ancestral land we talk about later, and so on.
Yeah.
The government also did that, attempted to do that with the NDF in 2001.
Let's have peace first, and then let's talk.
They presented, this was in the wake of the 9/11. And the feeling was that because of the terrorist listing, the NDF can be forced to agree to a final peace agreement just so that terrorist listing will be lifted. So a high-level delegation of, there was Speaker De Venecia, there was Secretary Ermita, there was Secretary Afable, and I think Secretary Bello, went there with a final peace agreement. Secretary Bello was the chair, but he was not the head of the delegation now. It was Speaker De Venecia. Well, the third ranking is okay. But the agreement that was they brought was 3 pages, 2 pages saying let's end hostilities, stop the fighting, and then
I think that's what everyone wants.
The Karil will have to review it later because the Karil has already been.
So you're not in agreement with that. You're not in agreement with that.
NDF said this is a document of capitulation because we're going to sign an agreement, but we don't have reforms. The Hague Joint Declaration, the framework agreement, is very emphatic that the resolution to the armed conflict could only be a result of addressing the roots, and that is through basic social and economic reforms, political reforms, of course, the respect for human rights and international law, before you come to the agreement on end of hostilities.
Ray, I need to interrupt you at this point. No, we need to take a short break. Please don't go away. When we come back, the result of our online poll on the issue and the final words of our guests. Please stay with us. You are watching Opposing Views. Welcome back. This is Opposing Views. I'm Rod Nepomuceno, and still with us, Ray Casambre and attorney Alex Padilla. Our question, does the arrest of Benito and Wilma Tiamzon hamper the peace talks between the CPP, NPA, NDF, and the Philippine government? Now, we have a Twitter question from @Tinay Palabay. And her question is, a peace panel determines its own consultants. Then why should the GPH or Philippine government feel that it has the right to determine NDFP consultants?
We never said that the government should determine the NDFP consultants. What we merely said was that the consultants that will be determined by the NDF should be involved in the peace negotiations.
All right. Okay. Now, Ray, I'll ask you to continue on. I abruptly cut you earlier. Yeah.
Before I continue, that's only half of what you said. Actually, you said to be involved in the peace negotiations, but you want them to be visibly involved. What we are saying is that the task of uniting the revolutionary movement will involve persons who cannot be visible.
Well, we're sorry to disagree with Ray, but if they cannot be visible at any time and they go underground, I think it is not too far-fetched for us to think that perhaps they're not talking about peace and actually trying to come up to a real war. No?
So, all right. Anyway, so let's move on to the next question. Do you agree? Do you agree, Ray, with localized peace talks with the CPP? The local, I guess this would mean, provincial or area peace talks rather than, national peace talks.
Let me answer with the position of the NDF, not my personal opinion.
Okay.
No? From the experience of the 1986 talks, localized peace talks have several disadvantages. One is that the local leaders become very vulnerable. They are exposed. In 1986, after the peace negotiations, even President Ramos, who was then the Chief of Staff and then the Secretary of Defense, admitted that the intelligence stock of the AFP on the CPP-NPA rose by 40% as a result of those peace negotiations done at the local level. The bigger reason why localized peace talks will not bring about the peace that we want is that the problems are national in character, in nature. Of course, you may have manifestations on the ground, and you can address some of these small problems on the ground. But the real big problems, like the policies on land reform, the policy on national industrialization, the policy in foreign trade, this cannot be resolved at the local level.
All right. Alex?
Yes. Actually, I'd like to put a different twist to the question. No? Should we be talking to the NDF or to the CPP?
Yeah.
It is our position or our thinking that the NDF is supposed to be a group or a coalition of several revolutionary organizations. But we know for a fact that all of them are headed by communists. And when a certain directive or policy direction is made, it is usually dictated by the Communist Party of the Philippines. And then let me now move to their December 26 statement of 2013. In that statement, the CPP Central Committee came out front with a statement saying that they are no longer interested in talking peace with this government, that they in fact want to topple or overthrow this government, and that they would wait for the next administration. And when the CPP talks, everybody...
That was made when?
December 26. This was their anniversary statement. No? Okay. And on our side, we have said that, we have never closed down the doors. We remain open to the talks, but the other side must also show some sincerity, because sometimes we get mixed signals. Some of them say this, but we get an outright directive or policy direction made by the CPP. And what are we to make of that?
Now, do we need... Excuse me. Yes, Ray, go ahead.
Alex, I wish you would quote the statement more accurately, because you are putting words in the mouth of the CPP. The statement was saying that the government's actuations show that it is not interested in the talks. Under these conditions, I'm trying to paraphrase it, but if you want the exact quote, I can get it to you. I can show it later. Under this situation, where the government does not want to seriously talk about the agenda, then we are prepared, or the exact words are, we have no choice, the revolutionary movement has no choice but to wait for the next administration.
So those were the exact words. There was no toppling of the government?
Or there was.
The question of the toppling of the government is a strategic one. Without the peace negotiations, what the CPP was saying is that without a final agreement, without even a truce and alliance, then we continue with the war.
With the struggle, all right.
Yes.
All right, so unfortunately, we've come to the end of our 1 hour. At this point, I'd like to give you the opportunity to give your final words. No? Alex, you first.
Yes, okay. Okay, let me say that I'm of the belief that the government cannot stamp out the insurgency through military might alone. No? I think that's a given. No? But I also believe that the NDF or the CPP-NPA cannot win the revolution no matter how long it takes. And if both sides recognize that fact, that they cannot win and that we cannot remove the insurgency totally, the only alternative left for the two sides is really to talk. That's all. Right. We want to talk. Yeah.
Ray, your final words?
Well, the Philippine Peace Center is really a peace advocacy organization. And as a peace advocate, I have to say that I am an absolutely optimistic about the peace negotiations. Partly agreeing with, no, not partly, for a different reason, actually. I also think that the government and the NDF have really no choice at this point but to continue with the peace negotiations. It's
whether there's arrest on Tiamzon is relevant or not, they have to continue on.
Oh yes, and I believe that eventually the two sides will sit down again. But the experience of Mindanao, because we were the program was prefaced with the peace agreement in Mindanao, no? The objective is not to come up with a peace agreement. The experience of Mindanao shows that you have this is the third peace agreement, but you don't have peace. What we need is a peace agreement that will address the roots of the armed conflict. That is the objective. If you have that, then you can really have an end to hostilities.
All right. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks to our guests, Ray Casambre and Attorney Alex Padilla. Thank you very much, sirs, for taking the time and joining us here on Opposing Views. Now let's see the results of our online poll. Our question, does the arrest of Benito and Wilma Tiamzon hamper the peace talks between the CPP, NPA, NDF, and the Philippine government? Those who answered yes, it will hamper, 60%, and those who answered no, 40%. And that's our Opposing Views for tonight. Tune in again next week for another bold and engaging discussion on today's most relevant issues. I'm Rod Nepomuceno. Good night and God bless. All right, joining us tonight in our discussion is Ray Casambre, Executive Director of the Philippine Peace Center. Good evening, Ray.
Good evening.
Yes, could you give us maybe a 30-second summary of your position regarding the debate matter for tonight?
Well, the Philippine Peace Center definitely thinks that the arrest of the Tiamzons would hamper the negotiations for two reasons. One, it is a violation, another violation of the agreements entered into by the two parties. And second, which also constitutes a violation, but even from the point of view of Philippine law, the arrest and the continuing detention is illegal. So in other words, it is a human rights violation, which you do not have to be a member of the NDF or the party to see. If you look at the rights of the people, you can see, and if you look at the case, the incident, the facts, even by Philippine law, it is illegal. And this also affects the negotiations because one of the agreements, aside from the agreement on safety and immunity guarantees, is the agreement on human rights and international humanitarian law. Meaning both parties are...
The content of news, no? It's been on the headlines of all major broadsheets. So let's start off with this question, and you touched on this already, Ray. Is the arrest legal? Of course, you already answered that it wasn't legal. And can you elaborate further why this arrest of the Tiamzons is not legal?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but again, you don't have to be a lawyer to understand. Anybody knows that once you're arrested, an arrest warrant is supposed to be shown to you. In the case of the Tiamzons and their 5 companions, well, from the reports of the lawyers and from the news, we know that no warrant has been shown to them for at least, I think, even up to the present, no? And again, even if you do not know this for a fact, you know for a fact from the information that an inquest was held, again, much past beyond the time that this is required by Philippine law. But the point is, in that inquest, they were charged for illegal possession of firearms. Now, what's wrong with this? I thought they were supposed to be charged with the murders in Samar and the murders in Leyte. But why is this not the charge being made now when they were in the inquest? So a lot of questions.
So on that basis, the arrest is illegal. Yesterday's ceremony on the historic signing of the Comprehensive Agreement on the Bangsamoro is anticipated to bring harmony between the Philippine government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. This agreement is also expected to convince remaining armed groups such as the NPA to talk peace. But some believe that the signing came at a time when the sincerity of the administration to honor past agreements with these organizations is in question. The Communist Party of the Philippines and its armed wing, the New People's Army or the CPP-NPA, is the longest-running insurgency group in the world, formed in 1969. The NPA was even designated as a foreign terrorist organization by the U.S. State Department and as a terrorist group by the European Union Common Foreign and Security Policy. The government of the Philippines, however, delisted the NPA as a terrorist organization in 2011. In its more than 4 decades of existence, peace negotiations have gone up and down and just recently reached an impasse after the alleged walkout of the National Democratic Front or NDF panel after a disagreement on the agenda.
Committed to respect human rights and international law, and that would include the question of whether arrests are legal or illegal. As far as the violation of agreements is concerned on JASIG, it can also be shown. You don't have to be an NDF or CPP member. You merely read the joint agreement, look at the facts, and it can be seen that clearly Benito Tiamzon and Wilma Tiamzon are covered by the safety and immunity guarantees.
All right, thank you very much, Ray. And to my left, on the opposing side, is Attorney Alex Padilla, Chairman of the government panel negotiating with the CPP, NPA, NDF. Good evening, Alex.
Yes.
Yes, good evening. Your 2 cents worth on this issue.
Well, I think the arrest of the spouses Tiamzon, no, should not dampen or hamper any progress of the peace talks. No? I think this is one is completely separate from the other. If the other side was really sincere in actually coming to terms with Philippine government on the peace. Of course, I dispute what Ray is saying about the illegality of the arrest or even the applicability of the JASIG. But I think we can do that.
We can do that, yeah. I guess so. The whole point of this debate, this discussion, is to clear out the air, I guess, and also to find out more of the details regarding this matter. There's obviously it's been the content. It's been on our headline. The prospects for talks with the communists got even dimmer after the recent arrest of the alleged CPP chairman Benito Tiamzon and his wife, CPP Secretary General Wilma Tiamzon. Both are said to be NDF consultants. The recent turn of events between the CPP, NPA, NDF, and the Philippine government cast more doubts on each other's sincerity to the peace process, prolonging the longest insurgency in the world and the attainment of peace far from reality. Welcome to Opposing Views, a hard, straightforward discussion of today's most pressing issues. The National Democratic Front of the Philippines, or NDF, has been engaging in peace negotiations with the Philippine government for the past 27 years. but issues of mistrust, insincerity, extrajudicial killings, unlawful arrests, and many more impede such process. It is certainly far from over. So we ask tonight, does the arrest of Benito and Wilma Tiamzon hamper the peace talks between the CPP, NPA, NDF, and the Philippine government? Good evening, I'm Rod Nepomuceno, and this is Opposing Views.